30 years ago, accessing the internet was a privilege for a few. Less than 1% of the world's population had this possibility. And even then, it was an extremely limited service. Just 3 decades later, everything changed. Nowadays, 2/3 of the world's population access the internet. That's over 5 billion connected human beings. The internet has become a part of our lives, and for many, having access to it is almost as essential as electricity or piped gas. After all, we spend a good part of the day online. And with our heavy reliance on networks nowadays, it makes us wonder, what would the world be like if the internet ceased to exist? Before we engage in a thought exercise, it's good for you to know that there have been situations where millions of people were without internet access for long periods, and some of them were for quite unusual reasons. One of my favorite stories happened on March 28, 2011, when an elderly woman cut a cable and left an entire country without internet. This occurred in Armenia, a country located between Europe and Asia. A 75-year-old woman was searching for scrap metal to recycle, and she found a cable that she thought was copper and could be worth some money, so she cut a piece of that cable. The entire Armenia, along with parts of Georgia and Azerbaijan, were without internet for 12 hours. That's because worldwide, the internet depends on a network of millions of kilometers of fiber optic cables. Many of them are underwater. Take a look at this map. There are gigantic cables of up to 20,000 kilometers connecting the continents. And one of the factors that can lead to an internet blackout in some places is related to these cables. The intentional action of authorities is also a threat to the internet in some regions, like what happened in 2019 when political disputes led the Indian government to limit internet signals in the Kashmir region, which has more than 10 million inhabitants. And this went on for a year and a half. The same thing happened in some countries during the Arab Spring in 2010, and there's nothing preventing it from happening again in the future on an even larger scale. Some experts even say that if the United States wanted to, they could shut down the internet worldwide. Yeah, it's scary to think that the connection of so many people is under the control of so few, and it's really few. In a book called Error 404, Prepared for a World Without Internet, researcher Esther Paniagua tells us that the global internet is in the hands of 14 people in the United States. This group of guardians is responsible for controlling the DNS system. It's what translates IP addresses into domain names, and without it, the content of the internet would still exist, but it would be somewhat inaccessible. These 14 guardians meet every 6 months to update the system, and they even need to bring a physical key to these meetings. It sounds like a spy movie, except instead of 007, it's 014. And another reason that could jeopardize our connection is wars. That's what happened in Yemen a few years ago. The entire country was offline for days due to an airstrike that hit the state-owned company responsible for internet access in the country. Now imagine this on a global scale. Experts say there are about 30 buildings that are the nerve centers of the global connection system, and if simultaneous attacks were made on all of them, the global internet would basically stop working. And I also hope no terrorist group is watching this video. Far from Earth, another factor that could put our connection at risk is solar storms. This year, in fact, some newspapers reported that the increase in solar activity could lead to a large coronal mass ejection, which in turn could distort Earth's magnetic field and cause an internet blackout. Actually, it's not quite like that. As I explained in another video, we still don't have the capacity to predict with precision, nor well in advance, how and when the next solar storm will be. This could happen at any time. But only an extremely strong and extremely unlikely storm would cause a widespread outage on Earth's internet. But for the sake of curiosity, let's imagine, what if that happened? And if any of these scenarios I've brought up here caused a total and permanent blackout of our connection? What would our lives be like if overnight the internet simply ceased to exist? Well, the first major challenge would be to know that it happened. After all, our main tool for discovering what's happening in the world is the internet itself. Without it, we would certainly take a while to get an idea of the extent of the damage. At first, you would surely check your modem or try to reconnect to your phone's network. I don't know, put it in airplane mode and then turn it off. Then you would angrily call your service provider, and they might not even be able to answer you since millions of people would be experiencing the same problem at the same time. The news that the entire world's internet is down would probably come through television, but rest assured that it wouldn't be that quick. And that's because the internet is essential for journalists to communicate with correspondents in other parts of the world. Realizing that the outage is global would require many phone calls, and news outlets would have difficulty accurately reporting what had happened. In fact, information as a whole would be severely impacted if the internet were to end. Think about all the text, photos, videos, all the content that's only available online without a physical copy. To give you an idea, the amount of data on the internet as a whole is in the range of zettabytes. That's equivalent to 1 trillion gigabytes. On Wikipedia, for example, there are over 1 million pages just in Portuguese. Its loss would be the 21st century equivalent of the burning of the Library of Alexandria. To research information without Google, you would have to resort to old paper encyclopedias, which are updated much more slowly than any website nowadays. And then the students would understand the drama of the lives of people over 30. Our social life would also not be the same. Without social media, we would lose the great environments for debate and discussion of ideas that shape our daily lives. We would no longer be memes on X, photos on Instagram, dances on TikTok, or connections on LinkedIn. And I'm sure you wouldn't remember almost anyone's birthday anymore. Communicating with our friends would also change radically. Without our daily messaging apps, the best solution for chatting from a distance would be either to send a letter or make a phone call, like the old days. And without dating apps, the only way to meet someone would be face-to-face. We would also need to find new ways to have fun. First, because that secret game of the dinosaur that Google releases when the internet goes down would eventually become boring. And for those who like movies and series, there would no longer be streaming services. Would it be the return of video rental stores? Maybe many of you didn't even experience that time, and I feel very old saying this. I'm leaving now. Up to this point, you might be thinking it wouldn't be so bad. People would meet in person more often and maybe everyone would get a little closer. It could be, but the truth is that a life without the internet would have many other negative aspects. In education, for example, the possibility of having distance learning classes, which has become so common in recent years, would cease to exist. The same goes for healthcare. Telemedicine would be impossible, and even in-person appointments would be impacted. After all, services like registration, scheduling appointments, and booking exams would also go offline, complicating everyone's lives. In environmental terms, monitoring forest fires would become much more difficult, which could even lead to increased deforestation. And the field of technology would be completely impacted. Artificial intelligence, which has the power to revolutionize the world, would once again be an idea confined to fiction books. The Internet of Things, which allows the integration of objects in our daily lives, would also cease to exist, halting the current trend of automating our homes and lives. And the future of autonomous cars would be completely threatened. Speaking of transportation, we would need to navigate with paper maps. In some cities, traffic lights and automatic tolls would suddenly stop working, causing major traffic jams. The coordination of trains and subways would malfunction, and the situation in air transport would be even worse. Communication between control towers would face issues, and with the sudden inability to book flights online, a true global air chaos would likely ensue. And it's for these and other reasons that the biggest impact of the end of the internet would certainly be on the economy. We would likely face an unprecedented global crisis, starting with commerce. Firstly, all companies that rely solely on online sales would cease to exist, but even physical stores would suffer, as they depend on a long supply chain that goes from inventory control to customer. Payment methods. You might not even remember the last time you made a purchase using paper currency, right? This makes us realize that money, nowadays, is just a bunch of numbers on a screen. One person being richer than another doesn't necessarily mean they have more land or more material possessions, as it used to be. It all basically comes down to the number of zeros on an app screen. And so, the end of the internet would be the beginning of a catastrophe in the financial system. Right off the bat, all digital banks would be extinct, and the wave of bankruptcies, of course, would quickly hit traditional banks and brokerage firms, where stocks are bought and sold. Nowadays, this entire process is done virtually, so imagine the impact that a sudden internet outage would cause. Actually, you don't need to imagine, this has already been calculated. According to NetBlocks, an organization that monitors the internet, a single day without internet in the United States, for example, would cause a loss of over 11 billion reais in just 24 hours and in a single country, and all because of a technology failure. And this problem, of course, would be repeated in many parts of the world, especially in countries whose economy is more linked to the virtual world. There are countries, like South Korea, for example, where almost half of the entire GDP depends directly on the internet. In fact, if we look at the 8 most valuable companies in the world today, 7 are technology and internet companies. Therefore, another serious consequence of the economic crisis at the end of the internet would be unemployment and inflation. The truth is, we've turned everything into computers. From small daily activities to major global decisions, almost everything nowadays depends on the electronic brain of the internet. And with that, we've forgotten how to live without it. Perhaps for older people, it would be easier, but for almost the entire Generation Z, who was born in a connected world, they can't even imagine a world without this technology. It's not an exaggeration to say that many people would need therapy to deal with the withdrawal. After all, our society has turned the idea of being connected into an obligation. And if a few hours without internet already drive some people crazy, how would they fare after days, months, or even years? The world would certainly live in a dystopia. It's even difficult to imagine what it would be like. It can be said that humanity would regress decades. But it wouldn't just be a matter of returning to life as it was in the past. We don't have the same technologies from the past anymore. It would be necessary to resume the manufacture of equipment like fax machines, for example, but the production lines would need time to produce all these technologies again. Probably life in this imaginary future would be worse than it was actually in the past. After all, in this fictitious scenario, we would have known a totally different world. We would know that there was something called the internet, which was a universe full of endless possibilities, and that from one day to the next, all of them ran out. But perhaps the saddest of all these problems caused by the end of the internet would be that the censuses of the day would no longer exist. The good news is that all of this is practically impossible to happen, at least in such a lasting way. So enjoy that the internet exists, enjoy this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave your suggestion for a video you would like to see on the channel in the comments below. It was like this, in fact, that the idea for this video came about. Thank you very much, and until next time.